So today we've got the 4Acoustic series. These IEMs that I have with me right now, only one of them has been released into the wild as of now. The rest of them we don't even have final pricing as of now, which are so we have the 2p, and then the 4p and the 8 pluses. None of these I have technical specifications for, because even if you visit the website, it will still say that they're coming soon. So yeah. Now, disclaimer before we start the review: these units were provided by Denny, who is a distributor of 4Acoustic here in Indonesia. He just gave us these units to review. He did not give us anything in return. We don't get any discount whatsoever, or we're not getting anything from him, basically. So this review will be completely of my own opinion. So yeah. Now, the way that this review is gonna work, because this is gonna be one hell of a long video, I'm gonna go through all of these IEMs one by one, and then I'll just compare to them some other stuff in their respective price range. Now, the way that the lineup works currently is that from the 2p model, which is the lowest end model, it goes all the way up to the 8p model. The lowest end model, the 2p, retails for around, or is supposed to retail for around 170-ish US dollars. The 4p is supposed to retail around 350 US dollars, and the 8p is supposed to retail at around $750. So those are going to be my price references when I'm reviewing these. Those are not final prices. They might differ in your country of origin. None of these, except for the 2p, have been released in the wild. So yeah, prices might change. So let's just start off with build quality, and I'll just start off with talking about these two, the 2p and 4p, because all of them are built quite similarly, and we did not actually get production packaging, so we only got them in like this nifty case, which is actually very nice, but we didn't get the production packaging on what they're gonna be sold in. So I'll just skim through the build quality of these quickly, and I'll just go through the 2p and 4ps, because the only difference between all of these three models is that they have switch models and non-switch models. So the 2ps here, they don't have any switches on the back of the IEM, but the 4ps do. So these switches are used to alter the sound signature of these IEMs, and boy, can I spoil this review for you by saying that this is probably one of the first IEMs that I've ever heard that actually have switches that change the sound. So yeah. Now, build quality wise though, I think they're pretty decent. They're a pseudo custom IEM shape, supposedly made out of resin. I'm not sure, they did not give me specs about the material that was being used, but they're quite lightweight. They feel quite strong. I have not tested. I have not had them for long enough to say that how durable they are. The faceplate looks absolutely gorgeous. I don't know if you can change out the designs on all of these models, or if they're a fixed plate faceplate design. But I'll let you know if I get any info from Denny about that. The nozzle on these is a regular size nozzle. I think spin fit CP100s, normal nozzle sizes can fit on these, no problems at all. Now, these IEMs are more of a sort of pseudo custom IEM, a bit deep fit. So if you have issues with fitting IEMs deeply into your ears, these might cause you some issue. So just pay attention to that. And on all of these models, they have dynamic drivers, and there is a big ass vent on the back side of the IEM. So overall isolation on all of these models is quite decent, but not the best. Cable on all of these are also the same. They are. I have mixed feelings about this cable, because the cable going from the splitter down, it is quite pliable. There's no memory whatsoever. Microphonics are fine, but from the splitter up, where the braid becomes smaller, there's only 4 braids compared to the 8 braids from the splitter down. These retain some memory of their shape. They're not as supple or pliable as the cable from the splitter down. So that's a bit of an issue for me. And the chin slider, it works quite well. There's not much problems with the chin slider, I would say. Overall, the cable is not that microphonic. And my only complaint, as per usual, with IEMs, which are portable devices, I would say, they come with a straight jack. I don't like that. So I would prefer an angle jack for IEMs, because normally you would plug these into your phone, and if it's a straight jack, you might have a higher chance of breaking off your headphone jack with a straight jack, because there's more leverage. So anyway, but now that we have build quality out of the way, we'll just start off with sound, and we'll start off with the 2Ps. Overall, the 2Ps sound, they have this V-shaped sound signature, but the mid-range of them is not very behind. And this is actually pretty consistent over all of the whole range of IEMs that have been given here. The 2P, 4P, and 8Ps overall, roughly, they all sound quite similar, but they are more refined the further you go. Now, starting off with the 2P, when we got more detailed into the sound, the 2P's bass is, well, emphasized definitely, but I don't think that this is bass head level of bass emphasis. Like, if you like emphasized bass, I think these will prove you quite well. The sub bass slam is quite well. Texture is also quite nice. Mid bass kick and punch is quite good also. Speed is more on the medium side of things. It's not the fastest bass in the world, so if you listen to stuff like Dragon Force, it'll fall behind quite quickly, but for other music, there should be no problem. Now, there is some mid bass bleed here, but only ever so slightly. It doesn't really bother me too much, but I just wanted to mention that. Now, aside from that, don't have much complaints about the bass of the 2Ps, although the texture could be improved. It does occasionally sound a bit one-notey, but that's me nitpicking quite a bit. But now, let's just get into the mid-range of the 2Ps, and the mid-range of the 2Ps, I don't have lots of complaints about. The 2Ps mid-range, I think, is quite full-bodied. Female vocals, male vocals, instruments overall, they sound quite thick and warm. It doesn't have the caveat that normally V-shaped IEMs usually do. Normally V-shaped IEMs have this sort of like hollow-ish mid-range, but these don't have that issue. So, and separation and detail of the 2Ps, I think, in the mid-range is also quite good. There's not a lot of things I will complain about in the mid-range of the 2Ps. Overall, I think they're quite good in the mid-range. Now, the treble region of the 2Ps is what I have issue with, because the treble region of the 2Ps, not only does it not extend that well, but it has quite good separation and detail, but it is also quite sibilant. The 2Ps treble is sibilant to the point where I find it annoying a lot of times. It is still listenable, and aside from that sibilance, there is also this BA timbre, this BA crunch, I would like to say, which is very evident in the 2Ps here. So I couldn't really enjoy it that long. I mean, I can't really stand treble crunch on sibilance that much. So if you don't mind that, if you're able to, handle sibilant quite well, then I think you'll do just fine. But aside from that, yeah, you might want to steer away from these. Now, Soundstage and Imaging of the 2Ps, I think, is probably one of the good points of them. Soundstage is very wide. It's actually very, very wide. Like, if this were my head, the soundstage of the 2Ps are around about here, which is unusual for IEMs. Normally, especially IEMs that isolate this well, normally you'll have a more closed-in soundstage. Depth isn't that great though. The depth is, compared to the width, is very small. The center of the sound at most goes around about here. So yeah, it's not the best depth in the world, but I'm not gonna hold that much against it. And imaging wise, I think it does quite well. I'm able to perceive at like a 45-ish degree accuracy. So yeah, which is pretty good. No problems there. Now we'll talk about the next one in line, which is gonna start causing me issues because there's so many things to talk about the 4Ps, because they have lots of configurations here. And we'll just start off with the what's it called? We'll start with the bass. The bass of the 4Ps, they're as emphasized as they are in the 2Ps. But the quality has been improved significantly. There's a lot more texture in the bass of the 4P, and speed remains right about the same. they still retain the same quality of slam in the sub bass, and this kick and the punch in the mid range not mid range, the mid bass has been improved ever so slightly. But one other thing that has been improved is the mid bass bleed is less on the 4Ps, and another thing that they have is the switch on these. So they have 3 switches on here. They have the 1, 2, 3 switch. Now if you turn off the number 1 switch, that reduces the amount of bass quantity, and that increases the speed of the bass ever so slightly and reduces mid bass bleed. And the amount of bass reduction here, from what my ears tell me, is around like 4 to 5-ish decibel, if not more, and that's a significant difference, which is rarely seen in IEMs that have switches in them. Normally it's like maybe 1 or 2 decibels. This is a lot of change. So if you do not like how V-shaped these IEMs sound, like the 4Ps, maybe they sound too bassy for you, then you can reduce the bass amount with those switches. And it'll also give you a bit, increased speed and just reduce mid bass bleed, as I mentioned earlier. Now, aside from that, when we start talking about the mid-range of the 4Ps, I think the mid-range of the 4Ps are a bit more bodied than the 2Ps. Although the mid-range of the 4Ps has better detail retrieval and separation. And again, they have a switch for the mid-range, which is the number 2 switch on the 4Ps, but it makes it sound hollow, and then makes it sound like any other V-shaped IEM. The mid-range just falls behind and it just sounds hollow and off. So I would not suggest changing the number 2 switch, but I'm just describing what I am able to hear with the change of the number 2 switch. So yeah. Aside from that, again, not many complaints about the mid-range of the 4Ps. It's quite thick, full-bodied. Female vocals and male vocals sound great. Notes are also alright. Note weight is more on the thicker side. So yeah. Now, when we start talking about the treble of the 4P, this is where I have the biggest issue with the 4Ps. The 2Ps already had sibilants. The 4Ps make that even worse. They have even more sibilants, they have even more BA crunch. This is my biggest problem with the 4Ps. Otherwise, I would say it's quite an excellent IEM. Although the separation and detail has been improved significantly, on the stock setting, I just don't enjoy the treble presentation of the 4Ps. But if you turn off the number 3 switch, which is what I have done for the 4Ps, this will reduce the treble emphasis and the overall sibilance and BA crunch that I'm able to hear significantly, and it makes it overall a more pleasing sound signature overall. And at this point, with this configuration that I have, it just sounds like a more bassy, warm-ish IEM with just a slight treble sparkle. It's more of a V-shape, leaning more towards bass, but I kinda like how they sound in this configuration. Although I do wish overall they had better technicalities in this price range, overall I think this is pretty solid. Again, but the treble extension, like the 2Ps, they're not that excellent, but there's rarely any music that goes far beyond what they are able to do. So I'm able to hear the extension of the 4Ps and 2Ps up until like around 16-ish K. My hearing stops at 17K, but there's not a lot of music that goes way beyond that anyway. So I don't find that to be much of an issue, but I'm just pointing that out. Aside from that, the soundstage and imaging of the 4Ps is a bit of an improvement. So the soundstage width remains about the same with the 2P. I think they're very wide. The depth has been improved, not significantly, ever so slightly. So now the sound of the image can go right around here. Sound of sound, and that is definitely an improvement in terms of depth. So if the 2P sounded a bit too claustrophobic for you in terms of depth, I think these will give you, better depth. Imaging wise, I'm not able to perceive much, if any, difference at all. I think it's still as accurate, so no issues there. Now we're gonna talk about the model which I'm most excited about, which is the 8 Plus model. So the 8 Plus model here is amongst all of its peers, the 2Ps and 4Ps, I think is most mildly V-shaped sound in stock configuration, and these only have 2 switches that you can configure, which does the bass and the treble, but we'll get into that when we get to the respective sections. Now, overall, when we talk about the bass, so the bass of the 8 pluses, unfortunately, I would say the texture here isn't that great. I think these fall behind the 4Ps in terms of texture quality, but the sub bass slam, mid bass punch, and kick, I think remain right about the same, just slightly reduced in terms of quality. Overall quantity of the bass of the 8Ps are also just ever so slightly less compared to the 4Ps. And if you turn off the number 1 switch, which alters the bass quantity and reduces it, this just becomes a bass that's just ever so slightly just emphasized, a little bit emphasized. Like, I wouldn't even really call it emphasized at that point. It's just a bit north of neutral, but it retains the same amount of quality and just overall has speed improvement. And even in the stock configuration, I think the speed of the 8Ps are in the bass are just ever so slightly better compared to the 4Ps and 2Ps. This becomes a bass that's more on the medium to fast-ish side, which I don't mind. It is able to handle music that's faster than the 4Ps and 2Ps better, but it's not that much of an improvement in the bass. And again, you're sacrificing texture in the bass for that speed, so depends on what you prioritize. Now, the improvement in the bass of the 8Ps is in terms of the mid-bass bleed. There's less mid-bass bleed in the 8Ps, if at all any. It's just ever so slightly that I'm able to perceive, but I'm not going to complain much about it at all. And this will be also relevant to when we're talking about the mid-range. The mid-range of the 8Ps are also just they're just a little thinner compared to the 4Ps and 2Ps. I think the mid-range of them are not by any means thin. They are still quite full-bodied, but they are not as weighty as the 4Ps and 2Ps mid-range. But the mid-range of the 8Ps you cannot alter. It only has 2 switches, so yeah, you're kind of stuck with that. But I don't mind that, because the presentation of the mid-range I actually quite like. It's not too thick, it's not too thin. I think it's just about right, and the amount of separation and detail in the mid-range I think is quite excellent. Overall, female vocals, male vocals, and just instruments in general sound quite good on the 8 pluses. So no complaints there. Complaints again come in when we talk about the treble. There seems to be a general trend on the treble of all of these models from 4Acoustic, that they have this PA timbre and just this crunch in them, which again causes sibilance, and generally just, I'm not a huge fan of the treble of all of these. But again, the 8 pluses have a number 2 switch, which reduces the treble quantity, and when you turn that switch on, that issue just reduces quite significantly, and it also reduces the quantity significantly, because it is as emphasized as its other siblings. It has quite a lot of emphasized treble in stock configuration, but when you turn that off, it just becomes a more neutral presentation. Separation and detail in the treble I think is also quite good. No problems there. Extension remains about the same. I'm not able to hear much above 16-ish K, so yeah, that's something they have to work on, I would say, but not priority. Definitely not. I would rather have them prioritize fixing that BA crunch in the treble and the sibilance in stock configuration. Overall, I think the 8 pluses are quite a good IEM, but we'll talk about comparisons later on. But before we even get to comparisons, I would just like to point out the best part of the 8 pluses. So, like, the thing that I like most about the 8 pluses and why I like them so much, which is the soundstage of the 8 pluses. This is probably one of those IEMs where I can say that they don't at me for this, but they sound like I'm wearing headphones. I really hate that term, but this is sort of what they feel like. It's because the soundstage is just so wide, and it is at around my head. Sometimes it just goes even further than my head, which happens very rarely with IEMs. especially with my perception of Soundstage, which is quite different to most reviewers out there. If you've seen any of my other reviewers, if you've ever seen any of my other reviews and compared them to other reviewers, and the depth of them are also quite excellent. The sound can come right around the front of my face, which rarely happens with IEMs. So I find that quite amazing, frankly, and I really like that. Imaging wise though, I think overall performance in imaging remains right about the same with the siblings. It's 45-ish degrees. I'm able to perceive not much more than that. That's partially also because of the limitations of my hearings, but I find the imaging of the 8 pluses adequate, if not quite excellent. So no complaints there. Now we get to the section where it's quite a bit tricky, because now I have to evaluate them at each of their price points. So I'm gonna evaluate the 2Ps against something like the KXSS, the star fields, and stuff like the ER2XRs. And at the price that they're going at, $170, I think they have some tough competition. Though I do think that the 2Ps are an alright AEM. Unless you like a V-shaped signature, I find it hard to recommend these with the star fields and the KXSs and the ER2XRs existing, because I think they're just a little bit behind in terms of technicalities, and that sibilance and the treble I'm not a big fan of. But if you don't mind that, then you'll probably like these. But I find problems with sibilance quite a lot, so I'm not a huge fan of these. And if you like emphasized bass, I think these will suit you well. But overall, I think if you're looking for a V-shaped sound signature, you don't mind the sibilance and the BA crunch in the treble, I think these will be a good option. But aside from that, I think you will want to look somewhere else. Now the 4Ps on the other hand, I think the 4Ps at $350, it just has a very tough competition, because the Blessing 2 exists in that price range. And I just can't say that the technical performance of the 4Ps are equivalent to that of the Blessing 2s. I think they're just one notch down. I think it's more fair to compare them to something like the BG-VP DM8s, the T-Audio Legacy 4s, and I think it is ballpark in that terms, in that performance region. Sound signature wise, I think it can cater for a lot of sound signatures that you want. Overall, it will still remain a more V-shaped sound in stock configuration, but you can reduce the bass quantity and the treble quantity and even the mid-range if you want, and make it even more of a V-shape if you want that. But unless you're looking for a V-shaped sound signature, I think it will be hard to recommend the 4Ps. If you don't like the Harman signature of the Blessing 2s, and you don't like the more laid-back presentation of the DM8s, I think these will suit you quite well. And I would suggest you listen to these first, because they have just plenty of configurations, and I might have missed one or two things when I'm listening to them. So yeah, but I think, although it might be a bit of a hard recommendation for me simply because of that sibilance and just the slight lack of technical performance, I think there's still an option in this price range, and a potentially good contender. Because I would say even the Blessing 2s in that price range, they're just, it's just a bit unfair, because the Blessing 2s are just that good, I would say. Now, the 8 pluses on the other hand, this is where it gets even harder, because the 8 pluses at $750, they're going for the big boys. They're going for something like the Moodrop A8s, the S8s, and even the Sony lineup, the IR M7s, and even close to the M9s in terms of price. So this becomes even harder, because I think that BA crunch and the treble, I just can't really, in stock configuration, I can't really forgive. And even if you turn off that number 2 switch, there is still this BA-ish presentation in the treble, But aside from that, just purely if you like that soundstage presentation of the 8 pluses, which I really do, had I not had any other IEMs in this price range, I would pick these solely for the soundstage presentation, because I think they're just that special. And the bass isn't that bad, although I did say that the texture wise it is worse than the 4Ps. I don't really mind that. Even in this price range, I can tolerate that simply because of that how the soundstage is presented. I think they've just done a very good job in terms of soundstage presentation of the 8Ps. I really like that. Again, I would suggest you listen to these if you are able to perceive the soundstage like I did, and you like that, then I can recommend these for that price, which I did not expect saying that for something that costs $750 and has PA timbre issues. But it just goes along to say how much I like that soundstage presentation that these do. Now, one other problem that might be there with the 8 pluses, which might deter you, or might not deter you, are those switches. If you really like to use the switches on these, and actually this will also hold true for the 4P model, I would not recommend you switching around the sound signature too much. Don't expect to buy any of these two models and just have one IEM for a lot of your solutions. Like if you want more of a warm neutral solution and then you want a free-shaped sound signature, don't expect to play around with these switches too much, because they are very fragile switches. This holds true for most of these micro switches that are there. It's not just specific to these models. I don't know if they have any ratings in terms of how many times you can switch around these, but I would not want to play around with these switches too much, because I expect them to break quite easily with how small they are. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Now, I think that covers pretty much everything. This has been a very long video. I will leave timestamps down below, if I remember to. And yeah, comment what you think, like if you like the video, and I'll see you guys next time.